Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. It's time, once again, for another depressing dose of dismal Disney. Disney's live-action remake of The Little Mermaid, starring Halle Bailey, opened in theaters globally this weekend, and its box office numbers are not that impressive. Domestically, the movie opened number 1 at the box office with $95.4 million. But of course, being that today is Memorial Day, we get to include the movie's holiday domestic box office earnings of $22.1 million, which, if we add to the actual weekend domestic total of $95.4 million, we get $117.5 million. But here's the interesting reality created by that 4-day weekend total. The movie only earned $68.3 million internationally for its opening weekend, so the global total is $185.8 million. This means that the movie's domestic share is 63.2%, which is truly awful. Prior to Monday's domestic box office of $22.1 million being reported, the global box office was at $163.7 million, and the $95.4 million that the movie earned over the weekend gave The Little Mermaid a domestic share of 58.3%. So while the shill media sites are going to be basking in the movie's $117.5 million extended weekend box office, they will probably ignore the movie's very bad 63.2% domestic share. But I won't. When I calculated my initial box office projections in a video that I had released last week, they were based on the premise that the movie would earn $110 million domestically during opening weekend. And I used the 53.1% domestic share from last year's MCU movie Black Panther: Wakanda Forever as a guess for how well the movie might do internationally. From that, assuming a range of weekly box office drops from 40 to 30%, I calculated a potential range of final global box office earnings for the movie of around $518 million to $688 million. But by using the movie's extended 4-day weekend domestic box office total of $117.5 million and a domestic share of 63.2%, with a range of 40 to 30% global weekly box office drops, the movie's potential global box office earnings now range from $465 million to $618 million. So even though the movie has earned $7 million more than the $110 million that the shill media sites predicted before the movie opened, its very poor international box office, giving the movie a domestic share of 63.2%, has led to a $70 million drop in the movie's projected final box office. And how serious is that? The movie's recently updated production budget is around $250 million. Which, if we multiply by 2.5 to estimate the movie's mid-range break-even point, we get a value of $625 million to account for the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. And the $618 million at the upper range of my updated final box office projections is below $625 million. But since we know Disney has been heavily advertising The Little Mermaid, its break-even point may be closer to 3 times the production budget, which would put it closer to $750 million. So how good would the weekly global box office drops for The Little Mermaid need to be in order for it to have a chance of breaking even? If the movie can sustain no more than a 24.5% week-to-week drop in global box office revenue, then the movie could possibly break even because the earnings could potentially go over $750 million if that happens. But I think that's very unlikely for several reasons. First, let's examine the movie's daily domestic box office since it opened last week. The movie's single best day so far in the US was on Friday when it earned $38 million, and that includes its Thursday night pre-opening box office. Then it dropped by 21% on Saturday to $30 million, and it dropped again on Sunday by another 9% to only $27.4 million. Finally, Monday's domestic box office of $22.1 million is yet another drop of 19%. So just since the movie opened last week, its domestic box office has dropped every single day. That's not a good sign. And do you remember what else I talked about in the video that I released last week? China, and how Disney tried once again to hide the fact that Halle Bailey is black by making her look blue in the movie posters that were released only in China, which is the same failed strategy that Disney used for the movie posters released in China for Star Wars 7: The Force Awakens and Black Panther years ago. So how much money did The Little Mermaid earn in China on opening weekend? $1.74 million. Yes, you heard me right, and that was only 0.94% of the total global box office to date, which is practically nothing. So in spite of the fact that China allowed The Little Mermaid to be shown there, the movie has totally flopped there, which is one of the reasons why the movie's international box office is so low. And Disney desperately needed strong Chinese box office numbers in order for The Little Mermaid to break even, but that's clearly not happening. Finally, there are the audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes, which on the surface look incredibly good at 95%, but it's a number that hasn't changed since the movie opened. If we click on that to see the movie's all-audience score, we see a number of 56%, which brings the legitimacy of the 95% audience score that Rotten Tomatoes wants casual site visitors to see into question. And that number's legitimacy is made further questionable by the 7.0 audience score on IMDb and the truly bad audience score of 2.3 on Metacritic. So it's rather obvious that Disney has probably paid hush money to Rotten Tomatoes to try and present an overly high, illegitimate audience score of 95% for The Little Mermaid in an attempt to increase the number of moviegoers at theaters. But I seriously doubt that the strategy will help the movie's very weak box office earnings. Thus, with its poorly lit underwater scenes, its poor CGI representation of beloved animated characters, its updated song lyrics, and its 2 hours and 15 minutes in length, Disney's live-action remake of The Little Mermaid is probably going to be one of 2023's biggest box office flops. And I want to point out that the original 1989 animated movie was only 1 hour and 23 minutes in length, which is a far more realistic runtime for young children to sit through. This live-action remake was clearly far more intended for adults and to promote woke identity politics. It has very little to do with being an entertaining children's movie, and as a result, it's very likely going to flop. It also demonstrates yet again just how out of touch and estranged Disney has become from its audience. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to see more of our videos in the future and help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.